Mike, you were talking about hit pieces against American citizens. Please continue from USAID.
Right. So USAID has a media development program. Development, in the same way that business development means soliciting donors, media development at USAID means acting as a donor to media organizations. So this is state-sponsored media. This is mercenary media for hire. When USAID's programming goals want the media in a particular region to print certain news stories or to demonize certain individuals or politicians in the area, they pay media outlets to produce the dirt on them. And this ended up spiraling back at home against Trump world in a massive way, because USAID paid $20 million to the OCCRP, the largest collective of investigative journalists, hit piece journalists in the world, the same group that broke the Panama Papers and suspiciously gets access to hacked documents and then is first to break them because they mysteriously obtain these hacked documents. Not exactly a good look when you're getting your money from a CIA cutout like USAID, but maybe that's a story for another day. But what they did is they wrote, OCCRP took that 20 million and they wrote hit pieces on Rudy Giuliani and his work in Ukraine. And then that ended up being used as the basis for part of the Trump impeachment in 2019, and Trump Ukraine and Trump world and Rudy in Ukraine. And so USAID is directly sponsoring the production of hit pieces to impeach the president under which USAID is nominally supposed to serve. I mean, this is the sort of thing that is, insurrectionary in the ultimate. But because USAID does not require presidential findings for its work, they don't need a report. The president can be kept totally in the dark. All the grant administrators need to know, all oversight is told is, we're supporting free and independent media in Ukraine. We're supporting free and independent media. And what they don't know is that they're working with their state-sponsored media to dig up hit pieces on their political opponents sitting in the West Wing of the White House. But you see this all over. USAID does the same thing in Western Hemisphere. USAID sponsors media that operates in Brazil in order to target Bolsonaro and his supporters, as all over Eastern Europe, basically in any country with a Trump ally, Pakistan with Imran Khan, you name it. But this gets back to this Truman Show point, which is that you're seeing these veneer of white shoe media, institutionally celebrated. OCCRP has gotten dozens of awards for high integrity media and breaking the most important media stories, and it's hit pieces for hire. It's like Paul Krugman getting a Pulitzer, but I mean the whole thing's a hoax, but it's a state-driven.
So has USAID, only 2 minutes in here, been involved in coups like the Maidan revolution in Ukraine? Has this money been used for such activities?
Yeah, coups is a particular specialty of USAID. USAID is the arch coup monster all over the world. For example, USAID spent like $1.2 billion pumping up the Arab Spring protests and giving money to the protesters and protesting groups and the institutions sponsoring them in Egypt during the Arab Spring in 2010, 2011. They did the same thing in Tunisia. They did the same thing in Ukraine in 2014. Victoria Nuland bragged on tape in December 2013 that USAID and the U.S. State Department and NED collectively paid $5 billion to the very institutions that spearheaded the overthrow of the democratically elected Ukrainian government just 2 months after she made that speech in February 2014 at the Maidan Square. And this is one of the reasons that USAID is spending tens of billions of dollars of U.S. taxpayer money to continue to pay these groups in Ukraine. You get them all on payroll, and so they'll do the dirt anyway. And a great example of this is a document that I produced about a year and a half ago, but I re-upped it this week, and everyone should read it, which is the Mark Milley, Joe Biden, Pentagon Special Forces Planning Manual that involves how USAID can assist secret special forces psychological operations work. when the military, there was a scenario in this public government document that I produced, the Special Forces Manual from 2021, that goes over a scenario where the Special Forces is planning a race riot in Africa in order to create a cleavage between African workers and Chinese business interests and a Chinese government attempt to purchase a port in West Africa. What I was referring to was a Special Forces document, a strategic vision blueprint produced in 2021 during the Biden administration control over the Pentagon, during the Mark Milley hold over the Pentagon, which laid out a strategic vision for how best to synchronize Special Forces psychological operations work with USAID and related partner groups assisting the psychological operations activity. Now, psychological operations is not like just some big bad voodoo work. What it usually refers to is the fomenting of cleavages within a society being targeted by the U.S. foreign policy establishment in order to achieve some national security or national interest end in the country. And so it's justified by keeping us safe and by making us wealthier. And what it usually refers to is a nice way of saying ginning up and generating riots in the country and street protests. All street protest activity that's organized by special forces, civil military or any Pentagon equity usually refers to has some component of galvanizing people to take to the streets to protest the government and create a democratic predicate for regime change by portraying the government as being unresponsive to the people protesting, and then categorizing police crackdowns on the Pentagon or blob-sponsored protesters as a humanitarian or human rights offense. But in this government document, which everybody can go to right now on my X page, it's at Mike Benz Cyber. I put the link there, and the page, it's pages 16 to 17. It's currently still up on the U.S. military's website, and what it calls for is it goes over a hypothetical scenario for how special forces can best carry out its mission during the Biden years, and they give the example of countering Chinese influence in Africa, which is a noble goal. Genuinely, truly is. We should be working to counter Chinese influence in Africa. But there are certain bounds on the dirty tricks that I believe the U.S. should put in terms of how it carries that work out. And in this, rather than creating a Truman Show out of all the institutions and population in the area where we're doing such dirty deeds, especially out in the open. So in this scenario, the U.S. military caught wind of a Chinese plan to purchase a port in West Africa, which would therefore give the Chinese access to the Atlantic Ocean and to therefore project influence against the U.S. Navy, and that could be a national security threat if China is buying up ports in West Africa. Totally agree. But in the scenario, they go over how the special forces would play a role in stopping this. And they give the example of what happens when the U.S. ambassador to that West African country tries to tell the African government not to build this port. And what if the African government says, no, we want to still build it? How can the special forces still stop the production of that port? And so the special forces there laid out a plan where what they would do is they would generate race riots to, quote, inflame racial tensions of the African population against the Chinese businesses in the area and against the Chinese interests in the area, and get the Africans to riot and do protests in the streets, as well as to quit their jobs so that they stop working for Chinese companies. And the special forces laid out the scenario where one of their key partners would be USAID, because USAID, under the mask, under the false predicate of doing jobs fairs, would provide no-show jobs to the striking and rioting Africans so that they would be financially incentivized to quit their jobs and participate in the riots to destabilize the African country. And that economic destabilization of the African government would force the African government to come back to the negotiating table with the U.S. State Department, where, in a sense, we would turn off the riots if they turn off the deal to buy the Chinese ports. But in that case, you have USAID as being the key partner by funding the capacity to do these riots. And you see USAID doing the same thing with the Maidan Square riots in 2014 that ousted Yanukovych. You saw the same thing with USAID funding the street riots against the Prime Minister of Bangladesh that successfully ousted her from office 4 months ago. You see the same thing with USAID funding the riots that successfully ousted the government of Tunisia during the Arab Spring. The same thing with USAID funding the riots that produced that ousted the government of Egypt during the Arab Spring. Time and time and time again, whether it's Western Hemisphere with Venezuela or Bolivia, whether that's Eastern Europe with Ukraine or Georgia, whether that's Middle East, North Africa with Tunisia and Egypt, whether that's Central Asia with Bangladesh, USAID is the primary sponsor of blob rent-a riots, and most disturbingly, that even comes back home because USAID has a very curious relationship with Black Lives Matter. You can look at Black Lives Matter having direct partnerships now with Samantha Power's USAID. These are public documents about Samantha Power's commitment to support Black Lives Matter programming. You also have the USAID paying $27 million to Black Lives Matter's chief organizational structure parent group, which is called the Tide Center. USAID paid them $27 million, while you had USAID adjacent riot planners in 2020 who openly contemplated through a group called the Transition Integrity Project that Black Lives Matter should be capacity built in the middle of their riots to serve as a potential destabilization force to oust Trump from office if he won the 2020 election.